In the age of fandoms and parasocial interactions, what does it mean to have a relationship with someone? This is Subin from the K-pop group TXT, listening to a voicemail from a fan.
했잖아. 그때 수빈이 반응 보고 너무 행복했어. 고마워. 수빈이가 누나를 기억할지 잘 모르겠지만 그게 중요하지 않아. 누나가 하고 싶은 말은 데뷔하고 좋은 리더가 되어줘서 너무 고마워. 누나는 수빈이를 알게 된 게 큰 행운이었어. 나이가 어린데 리더 역할을 어른스럽게 하는 것 같아서 너무 좋아. 항상 다른 사람을 배려해주는 행동이 너무 멋있고 멤버들 그리고 모아들 지켜줘서 너무 고마워. 수빈이는 혼자서 힘들어하지 않았으면 좋겠어. 누나 그리고 모아가 늘 곁에 있으니까. 그러니까 수빈이는 그냥 행복하고 건강만 하면 돼. 우리도 수빈이의 웃는 모습이 너무 좋아. 특히 수빈이의 귀여운 보조개. 많이 웃고 행복하고 건강한 걸 약속하기. 고마워. 고마워.
Okay, so actually, let's talk about Bo Burnham. Bo Burnham's outtakes from his recent special Inside came out recently. They're great. I love Inside, and I love a lot of Bo Burnham's work. I think he's an extremely vital artist, so I'm excited to talk about him today. Although there are some things that I'm going to be talking about in terms of critical aspects that I'm going to examine. So it's not just going to be a complete praise fest. Keep that in mind. But we can criticize or have critical conversations about the artists that we like a lot, as well as the artists we don't like. Also, this is technically music talk, because it's like a musical comedy we're talking about, but is it a comedy? It's musical. So, music. We're still talking about music. Today, I'll be talking about Bo Burnham, observing his progression with regards to his ideas on parasocial interactions, which can be defined as the interactions present between a media figure via media and the audience observing the media, or consuming it, if you prefer that verb. Through this, I want to talk about what parasociality actually is, mainly how our definitions of it are, in my opinion, como se dice, not good, and how through Bo Burnham's progression, we can see something of a path for how to develop a better understanding of parasociality. And despite the fact that I haven't taken my stimulant medication, I'm gonna nail it. I'm gonna do such a good job. Bo Burnham's old material. So Bo Burnham is, perhaps despite his best wishes, idolized by a lot of people. He's a comedian from Hamilton, Massachusetts, who became popular through viral music comedy posted to YouTube, which he then paired with a very popular stand-up comedy career. Bo's old material, as he spoke about in a clip from his recent outtakes release, has aged interestingly. A lot of the jokes he made... Rocky chair. Squeaky, squeaky. Squeaky, squeaky chair, squeaky chair. A lot of the jokes he made were quite edgy and insensitive even, which is not entirely surprising given that he first found popularity online as a teenager. I'm not the best or the first person to go in depth about whether or not Bo Burnham's jokes were insensitive and how or how not. Instead, I want to talk about Bo's relationship with performance. More specifically, performing for an audience. Bo's first special, What, is bookended by songs aimed at deconstructing him and his relationship to people around him. He starts with a robot voice introducing him.
This is Bo Burnham.
This is Bo Burnham. Hurling various insults at him, then saying, "You think you know better than me. You think you know better than everybody." The ending of the show, depicting various people around Bo having facetious views of him, ends with the repeated phrase, "We think we know you." This reveals Bo's neurosis regarding how he is perceived by others and what he is to perform to them. Much of the material in What speaks to Bo's fascination with manipulating the audience, including an early bit about pretending to have spontaneous moments on stage, then mocking the audience for thinking those moments were real. Art is a lie, nothing is real. You know that one. Much of the edginess we see in Bo's material at this stage is contextualized as him playing a type of character, rather than reflections of his actual ideas and personality. Songs like Sad are spoken by a fictional character and meant to satirize melodramatic performances of sadness and social interactions. Bo's bits generally during this period of time are, this thing is fake, this thing is stupid, these people are fake, these people are pretentious, this thing should be mocked relentlessly to show everybody how stupid it is and how stupid we are. That's where we get the song Repeat Stuff, which features Bo very aggressively interrogating and criticizing the modern pop music industry for what he sees as predatory actions towards young female audiences. It's here where we get a strong look at Bo's views on parasocial relationships in the modern day, and to me, it's kind of a mixed bag. So I always find it awesome how Bo's willing to pull the curtain, so to speak, on how calculated and manipulative the music industry is. It's great to criticize it. I don't necessarily agree, for instance, with the idea that love songs are written towards ambiguous subjects for a broad mass appeal, though that can be argued. I do see the point though, and I can largely agree that media industries are taking advantage of people's insecurities, especially young people's insecurities, for profit. However, with time, I've grown to take some issues with the messaging of Repeat Stuff, and maybe that's just because 2022 feels a lot different than 2013 did in terms of how audiences engage with material. But I can't help but feel that Repeat Stuff ends up being highly patronizing towards the audiences it purports to stand up for. The mocking of modern pop love songs as not being complex or beautiful is very like, I was born in the wrong generation kind of thing. It's very like low-hanging fruit, and it radiates the energy of one of those old memes that like compares a Tupac verse with a chorus from a pop Lil Wayne song and saying, look at how dumb new music is and these dumb audiences that listen to it. As if to insult people who see genuine value in records that entertain them while being simplistic and working with an effective formula. But more than that, I think Bo's characterization of young female audiences essentially being duped by artists like One Direction and Justin Bieber is ultimately kind of insulting to those young female audiences, suggesting that the correct approach for these audiences is to see through this ruse, which is designed to profit off of their low self-esteem and desperate need to feel loved, is ultimately suggesting a kind of inadequacy and naivete within that audience, as if they don't understand that they're part of an audience consuming content, as if they don't understand that they have insecurities, that media can manipulate their insecurities, etc. Parasocial relationships have changed a lot since 2013, and they do still and always will contain elements of toxicity and manipulation, particularly on the part of manipulative media figures. Elon Musk. But there was never a point wherein believers and directioners en masse truly needed a smart white guy to save them from the horrors of their favorite artists. And frankly, even though these artists have their own personality flaws which have been revealed over time, Liam Payne. It's a bit pessimistic to look at the work they did, both in their music and in their fan interactions, and suggest it was all a ruse for money. In some instances, sure, Liam Payne. But mostly, it's a far more complicated dynamic wherein artists are trying to make art and advance their careers, and do, at least to some degree, genuinely care about the well-beings of the fans they come across, and take some degree of pride even in being a positive figure for them. We'll talk about this more later when we talk about parasocial stuff, but for now I want to move on to more of Bo's old material to unpack his stances on performance and parasociality. In the aforementioned closer, We Think We Know You, Bo's characterization of an industry professional is notable in how it informs our understanding of his experience in media industries and, thus, his ideas on the role of media figures like himself. The song contains a character that's like a media industry figure who essentially urges Bo to dumb down his material to further cash in on the young audiences that have brought him to stardom. Young people, they're very passionate, they're very reliable consumers. Cater more heavily to them. This gives us an insight on how Bo, who has likely encountered this type of person in his career multiple times, has grown jaded towards the industry for having this condescending and exploitative approach towards young audiences, thus inspiring the ideas behind a song like Repeat Stuff.
All right, we've done studies. Young people do not respond to this introspective material or these challenges to the form, Young people want jokes they can relate to.
But it's also worth noting that Bo, who is still so young during the creation and production of this special, is not quite tuned in to making systemic critiques at a more nuanced, critical level. FD Signifier's video on Bo Burnham's Inside was a huge influence on this video. I loved that video. One of the concepts he talks about within the context of white liberals' views of racism is the idea that it comes down to evil, which makes it this mythological external concept. Oh, evil people are racist. Evil people do this. And now it's like, you know, you picture a villain from an anime instead of the systemic everyday thing that everybody participates in. So in my view, with regards to this subject, it applies also to his views on the music industry and its parasocial relationships, and how industry plants and professionals are literally sucking Satan's dick, in his view, and that the poor, unwitting victims of their actions simply need to be saved by someone like Bo, who is also performing to them and profiting off of them ultimately, but at least has the apparent decency to acknowledge it and tell people it's all fake and warning them to be careful. So, you know, mixed bag. But it's a great special. I used to love that special. So I just think some of that messaging is a bit off. Anyway, let's talk about Make Happy.
I can't fit my hand inside a Pringle can.
This is where Make Happy, Bo's special from 3 years later, begins to show progression from these attitudes and a development of Bo's critical approach to parasociality. Bo's still really obsessed with performance, though he's beginning to center his honest feelings more and more instead of speaking in abstractions. At one point, he even says, "I try to make my shows about other stuff, but it always comes back to performing." The thing is, though, there's still a lot of fairly edgy material in this special and some interesting takes on hip-hop, and frankly, a lot of Bo's shtick of like, let's shit on evil and tell it like it is still present here. An early fan interaction sees a fan yell, "Bo, I love you," and then he responds by saying, "No, you fucking don't." There's a lot of points during the special where Bo again assures his audience that his performance is a performance, it's fake, and he's not honest for a second up here. There's even more deep dives into the media and entertainment industries being insidious in some way. The country parody Pandarin is entirely focused on bashing industry-planted country singers. A rant about talk shows and them having vapid segments sees Bo quip that entertainers are lying to you. He has a very revealing moment in which he tries to almost entirely eschew the idea of having parasocial relationships with his audience, painting himself as more of an overpaid worker than some sort of human presence in their lives. He says, "I don't love my fans. You don't want that. You don't want that desperate cloying thing. If I stop entertaining you, throw me to the curb." The song K Yourself, YouTube, we're trying to skirt through YouTube's guidelines. You see me, YouTube, you see me. Takes aim at the motivational pop song, satirizing it by positing the pop star performing it as telling the audience to K themselves to escape their issues, then turning into a meta commentary about where actually the problem is the pop stars for writing these fake motivational songs, and that only if you search for wisdom in Katy Perry's lyrics should you K yourself. I actually really don't like this song at all, though I remember loving it when it came out. The thing is, it's not only full of that edgy, offensive humor that doesn't age well for me. Oh haha, diseases come from Africa, ha ha ha. It comes off particularly offensive because it's not even used in the context of like Bo positing himself as this evil villain character. It's used in the context of trying to communicate a serious message, and that serious message, much like that of Repeat Stuff, is still based in this extremely condescending view of pop audiences and this very flattening, mythologizing view of the music industry and its evil problems. Someone like Katy Perry or any other pop star writing a song with lyrics intended to uplift people shouldn't be seen as entirely pandering just for doing so, even if the songs come off vapid or worse, short-sighted towards actually helping people with their real issues. And audiences who like those songs shouldn't be portrayed as idiots just because they find a lyric or a melody inspirational. Once again, we're stuck with Bo simultaneously unpacking these really complex realities of performance and pretending for an audience and profit motives in the media industry, looking to help guide his audience and also express his own concerns, but then also just dunking on teenage girls and pop stars the same way you'd expect some dude on 4chan to do. In order to really talk about these issues though, and before we unpack the place Bo's coming from when he writes these things and how he progresses over time, we need to talk about what parasocial relationships really are, and how our commonly held ideas of them, in my view, are super flawed. Okay. Parasocial relationships. The term parasocial relationship was coined in a famous paper by Donald Horton and R. Richard Wohl in 1956. The opening paragraph read as follows. One of the striking characteristics of the new mass media, radio, television, and the movies, is that they give the illusion of a face-to-face relationship with the performer. The conditions of response to the performer are analogous to those in a primary group. The most remote and illustrious men are met as if they were in the circle of one's peers. The same is true of a character in a story who comes to life in these media in an especially vivid and arresting way. We propose to call this seeming face-to-face relationship between spectator and performer a parasocial relationship. Ever since then, especially in the past 10 years or so, as social media and content creation has risen as part of our daily media consumption and social discussion, we have been dealing with conversations about parasocial relationships. And to me, those conversations have always sucked. They're not good enough. We're not doing a good enough job. To talk about parasociality and how theories on it have developed over time, we will be looking at the book Understanding Media Psychology, particularly Chapter 7, written by Dr. Gail Stever. Stever is this person who's been researching parasocial relationships and fan stuff and social stuff for a long time. Stever notes the idea that parasociality is one that scholars disagree on, and that the research literature has developed mostly among different scholars, and even the definition of parasocial has been controversial. She notes two main points, however, that are fairly consistent among all these differing definitions. It is agreed that parasocial interaction involves the imaginary interaction an audience member has with media as it is being consumed. A key point is that it is not reciprocated. So it's my opinion that both of these key points are fundamentally flawed. For one, I don't believe that parasocial relationships constitute an imaginary interaction. I do not agree with Horton and Wohl's defining statement that parasocial relationships give the illusion of a face-to-face relationship with the performer. And I do not believe that parasocial relationships are not reciprocated. Okay, so if I basically reject the two main premises that scholars use to define parasocial relationships, how can I know what they are, or that the relationships I have in mind constitute this idea of a parasocial relationship better than the existing literature that literally coined the phrase? Well, if I may, I'd like to use this video as an opportunity to put forth a new theory of parasocial relationships that has some loose basis in Horton and Wohl's original definition, but instead characterizes the parasocial relationship as something entirely different and more suited to the information and ideas made more apparent in media in the decades since their original writing. And note that as I do that, I'm not really alone. Fan studies scholars have long been in contention with sociologists' ideas of parasociality and more so audience participation in media, and argue that much of it pathologizes the fan in a fundamentally classist and even misogynistic way. For one, it is my opinion that parasocial relationships are not fundamentally illusory. They're not illusions. People aren't under illusions. When we observe fan behaviors, whether it be for Twitch streamers or K-pop stars, we don't see behaviors indicating that the fans believe themselves to actually have a face-to-face relationship with the media figure, en masse anyway. They might feel a sense of closeness, but none of them are going to sit here and tell you, yeah, I know Hasanabi personally, except for maybe one or two people who are off. And in fact, particularly within the social settings of a fandom, a person acting like they really do have that private relationship with the media figure is going to get treated like a pariah. There's a clear delineation that fans make between what they do, which is essentially active appreciation of media and media figures and socialization with other fans, and stalker behavior.
What's the craziest thing, though, that one of your fans has ever done to try to meet you?
We don't want to call it crazy, but
Okay.
it was a wonderful thing. Like,
What's the most intense thing?
it just happened like yesterday at the LAX. They got those purple ribbons for the security. So like they, put all the way around us through in the airport and outside the airport, and keep the security for us. Like they did it themselves.
They tied
Yeah,
ribbon
for the
you?
safety. For the safety.
These lines are often blurred, as fans often cross the line between what's acceptable to say or think about their faves and what's unacceptable. However, the reason behind this is not an inherent illusory quality of parasocial relationships, but rather, in my opinion, it's the result of the same general toxic qualities of possessiveness and presumptiveness present in all types of relationships, in all types of social issues, mixed with general problematic attitudes towards celebrity and idolatry which are common in our world. A parasocial relationship is, in my view, an entirely genuine type of human relationship, which simply operates on very different terms from the face-to-face relationships we are more used to. It consists of the relationship an individual has within a collective, undefined audience towards a public figure. And that's something that's existed since the dawn of time, and it's something that we all participate in. You, who are watching this video, hi, are engaging in a parasocial interaction with me, the media figure. I assume that you are under no illusion that I am a person you're meeting at work or on the train. I assume you know we have no face-to-face relationship, unless you're one of the people with whom I actually do have a face-to-face relationship, in which case, hi mom. However, you're still perceiving me. You're still receiving me as a human being. You know I'm a human being, right? And you're thinking about my ideas, my presentation, my intentions, or whatever it is you're thinking about me. But you're thinking about me as a human being. You're not simply seeing me as, for instance, a piece of media that is not living or breathing. You know I'm a human being as far as you can accept that other humans exist all around you. You'll probably never meet me face to face, but given that my channel is currently not that big in this instance, there's a chance we can actually have some sort of a social interaction if you leave a comment I care enough about to respond. Do your worst. More than that though, there's a chance that this video is going to have some effect on you as a piece of human interaction. Whether you spend a minute thinking about how dumb the guy in this video is, or spend a day thinking about how much the guy in this video has a nice pair of glasses. But how can I consider this video as a type of human interaction when it is, in fact, a video? It's a piece of media I created with help from other people, hi danae, not a conversation I'm having with you. Well, how do we define human interaction? A textbook definition of social interaction states that it is the process of reciprocal influence exercised by individuals over one another during social encounters. Usually it refers to face-to-face encounters in which people are physically present with one another for a specified duration. Man, doing a video without taking the pill is like fascinating. I'm like getting all these bad memories of like how I used to do these videos and how spaced out I used to be while doing them. So now I'm just like super jumpy. That's how I stay stimulated. I'm super jumpy. Obviously, this isn't a face-to-face encounter, but more obviously, face-to-face encounters aren't the only type of social encounter. For instance, most people have friends or acquaintances they've never met face-to-face, friends they make on Discord or Twitter or at online work, and they talk to, both parties participating in a back and forth interaction. You can't just be like, well, those people aren't real. They're real. You're having a real social interaction with them. You might notice the difference between that and this is that you're not exercising any influence on me during this video. The video just exists. It's made, and now it's here. You can pause the video right here. Just kidding, you didn't pause the video. And the video is gonna pause, and when you play it again, it'll resume with no effect on the video. That's because this video is already created and produced, and even if I were to go in and edit it continuously, Kanye style, it would still appear to every audience member as an extant piece of media that they are consuming, not a person actively engaging in a social conversation. However, does that dynamic fundamentally prevent this from being a social interaction? I argue that it doesn't, because the audience can still participate and respond to the media. Maybe the response is delayed, like when you leave a comment on this video a few days after it comes out. But it's still a response. If I ignore your response, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Even if I didn't see your response, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Someone can ignore your input in a face-to-face conversation or not hear what you said. Someone can not read your text message. That doesn't mean you didn't both participate in a social interaction. It just means that one person's participation had different conditions, let's say. This is called the philosopher. Do it to any sick beat that you hear. Our lives are filled with social interactions wherein we have a lot less agency than the other person. At work, we're supposed to listen to our boss's instructions. We're not supposed to have equal agency to talk to them at the same level. At a protest, we're supposed to follow the actions of the crowd to create a communal action. At a soccer match, We might stand in a crowd, 50,000 of us, who none of us have individual interactions necessarily, but we might all sing together. You never walk alone. You never walk. And your participation is not some afterthought of this interaction. It's a key part of it. Our individual input has nowhere near the same power as the input of the crowd. So even though you don't have the power to stop me from saying things, to gesticulate in front of me, doing the philosopher that I just came up with, to send me messages during the video, or to make me respond to your comments afterwards, you're still participating. And your participation is not an afterthought of this interaction. It's actually a key part of it. First, in a very obvious market sense, I, as the producer of this media, benefit from gaining more consumers because I gain capital from that. Capitalism. So in a material economic sense, there's a very real sense of reciprocity in this. However, that reciprocity is based more in market exchange and bears more similarity to vending a product, which is a process that often doesn't include a type of social interaction. If you buy a shirt from Stussy, you're not having social interactions with everybody involved in producing that shirt. You're just giving money in exchange for the shirt. However, for a public figure, there's a far different dynamic at play that, for one, with social media, any response you give to a piece of media or a news story or whatever can be received by the public figure at the heart of it. Bo Burnham can log online and read every individual reply he gets on Twitter. And those replies can each have an impact on him as pieces of human interaction. Someone makes a meme of his tweet, and even if he never interacts with it, he might read it at home, laugh at it, or compartmentalize it. Similar to like a soccer player, Mohamed Salah. Why am I talking about Liverpool? A footballer, like Karim Benzema, might be at a match and hear one person in the crowd say, Karim Benzema, you're doing a great job. And he'll have a interaction. That's an interaction. He heard that person. That's a human interaction. But also, even if he doesn't hear somebody's individual yell, if somebody never has an individual interaction with Karim Benzema, he doesn't even hear them, does that mean they don't have some sort of human interaction in that space? Especially if that person has been part of this crowd cheering for Karim Benzema during the whole match. That goes to my second point. We need to recognize the role of the audience as a living human group, which constitutes one side of the two-sided reciprocal parasocial relationship. In the aforementioned example of a protest, the protesters are all in a group, sending one unified message. When the protesters are in a group, does the group suddenly become something non-human? Something non-participatory? I don't think so. Does it no longer have the capacity to engage in social interaction? I don't think so at all. In fact, it's the opposite. Each member of the group participating in it can boost a unified social interaction so as to amplify its reach and its power. This is the dynamic at play when we talk about media figures and their audiences. Even if Bo Burnham never has a social interaction with an individual in his audience, the audience as a collective is still engaging in a social interaction with Bo.
Prolonged eye contact.
This is easy to understand during physical performances in front of live audiences. But even when the performance is recorded at home, alone, with no physical audience present, this dynamic is still real, because the audience is still receiving a message in the form of a piece of media which has been addressed to them, and they are still processing it and responding to it. With that, let's talk about inside. Wow, I elbowed the fucking...
Sorry, I'm an anti-romantic. 달아나고 싶었죠. 작은 불 싫어더라. Sorry, I'm an anti-romantic. 너는 믿지 않아 romantic. 내 맘 전부 다 살고 언제만 남게 될까 두려워.
Conclusion: inside and rethinking parasocial relationships. At the end of Make Happy, Bo rips himself open for his live audience, acknowledging his self-consciousness and saying, "My biggest problem is you. I want to please you, but I want to be myself." In this, Bo is actively, though maybe not wittingly, acknowledging the reciprocal relationship he has with the audience, and that he perceives the audience as a you that engages with his work, whose thoughts and emotions he is factoring in, whose collective response he is anticipating and playing off of. This thus rejects the premise that this parasocial relationship is fundamentally unreciprocal. If it was unreciprocal, he wouldn't be able to anticipate, receive, and analyze his interactions with that audience, whether they be people in a physical crowd in front of him or viewers of his film at home. Additionally, when he says this, he's not doing so under the illusion that he has a face-to-face relationship with each person in the crowd. He's speaking to the audience as the collective with which he interacts during his performances, which is very much a reciprocal relationship full of potential individual interactions in addition to the input of the group. He walks away at the end saying, "I don't think I can handle this right now," and the film closes with him returning to a private setting, no longer performing for a crowd, but still performing, still interacting with the audience at home through a final song, basically asking them if they're happy. In this special, Bo reveals his difficulty with understanding and handling the very real but very messy, sometimes problematic interactions he has with his audience, and pronounces he will at the very least try to help them find happiness or help them understand themselves, which is something he's been working towards even in his previous special. To me, I find this all so cool and harrowing because it contextualizes all of his obsession with performance and his rage towards those who he perceives as being fake to exploit their audiences. Bo is recognizing that these parasocial interactions are extremely real, even if the performance that they're built on feels fake to him. And at the same time, those relationships are extremely confusing and often highly exploitative. He's also recognizing that despite his attempts to be above that, despite his attempts to not participate in that dynamic, he is in a way the same as the people he's criticizing, the Katy Perrys and the Justin Biebers. Ultimately, what's the difference parasocially between Bo writing a song to tackle themes of mental health and to talk to you, and Katy Perry writing a song to tackle themes of mental health to talk to you? I don't know, what do you think, motorcycle guy? Oh, too busy being cool. My bad. What's the difference other than that we generally perceive Bo's song to be better artistically and intellectually because of how it's written and produced? Bo lashes out at those trying to get him to appropriate those relationships more profitably, the way many media figures do, because he recognizes the power of those relations. But he also can't stop himself from participating in that same dynamic he criticizes. Because ultimately, how else can he speak to people? How else can he speak to an audience? It's impossible to create art telling people not to listen to public figures without then becoming some type of public figure who's demanding to be listened to. And despite all of the jarring, edgy jokes, the self-deprecating humor, and the harsh criticisms of pop stars, he can't escape what he is, another public figure being listened to. And there are many horrifying realities to this. Parasocial interactions are stigmatized widely in our societies, despite the fact we all partake in them, because we have this great fear of their repercussions, this great fear of the mob, of the obsessive stalker. There's no doubt that in addition to the fact that public figures often exploit their audiences in insidious ways, there is also a risk of the audience member being misled or pathologically disturbed by the complex dynamics of parasocial interactions. However, part of what makes Bo's songs like Repeat Stuff and K Yourself so problematic to me is that they play into the narrative that fans, and especially fangirls, are emotionally helpless, mentally disturbed, and intellectually backwards. These ideas are prevalent in our world, and they are ironically based in powerful institutions manipulating audiences into ostracizing regular people of the same class. The people that you meet in school, the people you are working with, instead of the people up here. Here's a good section from Dr. Stever on how fan studies examines these negative views of fandom and how these views are substantiated by powerful institutions' deceptions. Two factors were pointed to as an explanation for why fandom to that point had been pathologized. Those were elitism and a generally disrespectful attitude toward the common life of the average person in our society. In academic studies up to and including the 1990s, popular culture was contrasted with classical culture and deemed of lesser worth. Thus, while those who would passionately pursue opera and classical music were deemed patrons, those who passionately pursued popular music forms were labeled as fans and discounted as crazed and obsessive. Jensen pointed out that academics show a similar passion for their fields of study, but that this was deemed normal. Another influence that caused the slanted perspective on fan characteristics of the late 20th century was the analysis of crowd behavior that attributed tragic circumstances at concerts and sporting events to the crazed nature of crowds. In an analysis of some of these events, for example, the Who concert of 1979, during which 11 audience members were killed in a stampede, the event was initially attributed to selfish, drug-crazed fans. This proved to be untrue as it was mismanagement of the crowd situation, too few doors opened during a surge of fans trying to get in, that caused the tragedy, not the fan behavior in and of itself. Thinking of this event, I was reminded of times on the Michael Jackson tours while observing fan behavior, that I witnessed the same behavior being exhibited. Television coverage of the tour depicted fans as weeping, passing out, and frenzied over Jackson. I have written a number of times about how fans would perform for television cameras, and as soon as the cameras passed, they would go back to their normal conversations, waiting for the concert to start. An expectation about how fans were supposed to behave elicited the exact behavior these fans had seen portrayed in media. On one occasion at Irvine Meadows in October 1988, I was waiting for admission to a general admission seating area when the gates were opened and suddenly it was run or be trampled. As with the Who concert described earlier, there was one entrance for several thousand fans, and those who desired the best seating on the front of the lawn pushed through and started a stampede. No one was injured on this occasion, but after that experience, I had a healthy new respect for the power of the crowd and the dangers inherent in crowd mismanagement. Likewise, at Wembley Stadium in London 1992 at another Michael Jackson concert, it was unusually hot on the day of the show. Fans were allowed onto the field at about 2 p.m. and stood in close quarters for hours in the heat. By the time Jackson came on stage, many of the fans were passing out, and in the subsequent media depictions, the inference was that they were swooning over the presence of Jackson, instead of from heat exhaustion. I am not suggesting that there were no fans who were emotional for being so close to Jackson, but the exaggeration of the circumstances sent a very different message to what was really happening that afternoon and evening. When it comes to Bo's special Inside, I see a level of progression of Bo's views that acknowledge, however harrowingly and soul-crushingly, the reality that our problems are systemic and that we participate in them not out of being pure evil, but out of self-preservation. In this way, my video is guided by the aforementioned FD signifier video, in which he also notes in great detail how Bo has progressed through the years, and how Inside reflects a kind of ego death and vulnerability that is crucial for folks to undergo if they're going to at least try to change systems of oppression. In this analysis, I want to focus more on what that means for Bo's outlook on parasocial relationships, and then give some outward-looking conclusions before we go. Inside resolves some of the issues I have with Bo's previous work as I revisit it. Instead of being harsh and edgy towards perceived bad people, Inside is much more empathetic and its critiques are much more systemic. Songs like Repeat Stuff demean audiences, intention notwithstanding, by suggesting that, for instance, young fangirls are too naive and insecure to realize they're being duped by evil artists and industry people who have sold their soul to the devil.
I don't want you to ever think that I think I'm better than people or that I think I know better than people. Anyway, sorry. Okay. This is a song from the perspective of God.
Meanwhile, songs like White Woman's Instagram from Inside set you up for another satirization and lampooning of a naive person, a basic white woman, in this case, who's performative or whose interests are a bit shallow. but then completely subvert the form. Instead, delving into the white woman's personal traumas and sadnesses, having lost her mother, before returning to these humorous depictions of the character's Instagram, which, alongside subtle cinematography, repurposes our readiness to dunk on this white woman, turning it into a complex empathy with her and more of a suspicion towards Instagram itself, and how it can condense people's emotions and interests into pieces of content ready for us to mock with a quick laugh and a sense of superiority. My favorite song from the special, That Funny Feeling, is so much more stripped down and melancholy than anything Bo had released before. Even though the lyrics are still pretty funny and satirize our crazy exploitative world in honor of the revolution, it's half off at the Gap. The song doesn't take aim at any specific individual or audience for either being exploitative or exploited. It instead focused on said funny feeling, an emotional experience of existential dread and giving up and deep depression that everyone can relate to. It doesn't judge the feeling, it doesn't judge the feeler, it just expresses the feeling. What's so special about this is that it is Bo expressing his own feelings without judging himself and without attempting to preach to the audience about it. In 2016, Bo would have expressed this feeling by attempting to write a song about how the world's gonna end and everyone's too stupid to care, and then plead with the audience to get off their chairs and do something, while then probably noting the irony of how they all have to be in their chairs to listen to him because it's his concert and he's self-centered, and then he would dunk on himself for being hypocritical or whatever. And that's not necessarily bad, but in 2021, Bo released a raw, open piece of art that you're invited to listen to and relate to. It doesn't attempt to make you think or do anything, but in that way, it can be way more evocative because it operates from a place of empathy. That operation from a place of empathy highlights exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about with regards to parasocial relationships. Media figures like Bo can't just opt out of parasocial relationships when it comes to telling the audience that he loves them, or having fans that connect with him and just reap the rewards of just the exchange of putting out media that he's featured in. It doesn't work like that. There is some level to which you have to acknowledge the parasocial relationship and do your best to make it a healthy one that you contribute positively to. What takes place in a song like That Funny Feeling or All Eyes on Me, and even in songs like K Yourself and Repeat Stuff, is a type of interaction. It's not a typical type of social interaction. It's not a private conversation with Bo. You don't know him personally. Who he is as an artist is, of course, separate from who he is as a person in day-to-day life. But just as his art and his media presence can't substitute for knowing him personally can't substitute for receiving his art and his media presence. One of those things should not be more vaunted than the other because they each have their value. If we believe that personal relationships are more valuable, then we inherently suggest that the ideal way to know Bo is to be friends with him, which ultimately leads to our misguided feelings of wanting to be friends with artists instead of treating them like artists. That approach is part and parcel of idolatry of media figures. We don't regard their art and their personas as valuable enough. So we obsess with gaining closeness to them through trying to learn about them as people, as if them in their persona and in their art are not being people, as if they're just being products, workers.
Obviously, just kidding. These are both fake. I know how much it would disappoint my friends if I changed my appearance. I'm just kidding again. I'm not your friend, and you have no say over what I do with my body.
A parasocial relationship should be placed on the same level as, though not equated to, a personal relationship. Yes, friendships and family relationships can be way more valuable. They can give you things that a parasocial relationship never can, but also a parasocial relationship can give you things a friendship or a family relationship never can. Part of it is that the distance in a parasocial relationship allows you so much more freedom to consume the art without having to temper your interactions. You can't demand a friend talks to you all hours of the day, but you can watch Inside as many times as you want in the comfort of your home. And then you can study it and talk about it and write about it and watch related media to it and watch somebody break it down and watch Bo talk in an interview if he ever does one again. And gain a new sense of emotional and mental understanding from it each time. Heal through it. And the whole time you don't have to worry about invading Bo's privacy because that media was constructed as a message to you, but also as something he's comfortable with and not an invasion of his privacy. Because your relationship with him isn't based on having a private connection. The relationship is based on having a public connection. For the majority of us, there's nothing illusory about this. I don't think any of us would think that by watching Inside, we have a face-to-face relationship with Bo Burnham. Some may believe that, but the majority can recognize that that's not okay. We recognize instead that our dynamic with Bo is one of him being a media figure with which we interact as an audience, in a social relationship that is based in planned public interactions rather than private ones. And that social relationship, though it is based in media and audience response, can still and should still be grounded in human empathy. Bo can still care about a nebulous you and still write songs to help you find happiness, and you can still care about this parasocial Bo and send him messages in appreciation of his art without invading his privacy. We as an audience can have multitudes of interactions individually with each other and ideas, most of which will die out without Bo witnessing them. But Bo will at the very least witness our public response as audiences, such as our viral tweets or our laughter at his show. Bo will digest it in whatever way he digests it. He will receive us not as an object but as a group of humans, and process feelings about us as this group of humans, despite not knowing us privately as individuals. He will feel that he loves us or hates us, that he wants to please us, and that he wants to be himself simultaneously. This all shows that, contrary to prevalent scholarship, there is inherent reciprocity in parasocial relationships. It's just not the same kind of reciprocity we gain in a private relationship. So this video was inspired by a tweet that caused a stir a while back, which reads as follows: "I see you all idolizing Bo Burnham as though you learned nothing from John Mulaney." Now I find this take interesting. Of course, it's in response to John Mulaney receiving backlash for bringing Dave Chappelle in to do a set during his show, and then embracing Dave and calling him a friend after he'd done a bunch of transphobic jokes on stage. This really bothered lots of people who are fans of Mulaney online, given that many of them are part of the LGBTQ plus community. Many of them are trans, and many of them have found great benefit from Mulaney's work, whether it made them laugh, it opened their mind, it helped them socialize, whatever. On one hand, it's always important to remind people, deification and idolization are not okay. They are dehumanizing acts that negatively impact both the subject of idolization and the idolizer. Bo Burnham is a human being. He makes mistakes and has flaws like the rest of us, and we don't know him on a personal level. On the other hand, it bothers me that people's responses to negative parasocial interactions is that parasocial relationships themselves are the problem, and that people who participate in them essentially have it coming for idolizing people. For one, it's ridiculously hypocritical, because not only do we all engage in parasocial interactions, we all have ideas of people we've never met, idolizing them, hating them, whatever, but usually these takes are done by people with large audiences, engaging these large audiences in a parasocial interaction, like this tweet, which has 66,000 likes. But aside from this hypocrisy, the hyperfixation on idolatry and extreme depictions of parasocial relationships cause us to do nothing but blame people for doing perfectly normal things. I'm willing to bet that many of the people who were hurt by Mulaney's actions don't idolize him, nor do they think they know him personally. They were hurt because he did something transphobic, because he damaged their parasocial reciprocity, one in which Mulaney gains material and emotional benefits from having fans who support him, and one in which Mulaney's fans benefit from receiving inspiring or entertaining work from Mulaney, and community from being a part of this fandom, among other things. I'll end with this. Marginalized people are very visible within fandoms for a reason. There's a reason that a lot of these fandoms are consisting of young women, of young LGBTQ plus people, MB people, black people, Hispanic isn't a race, Asian people, multi-ethnic people, poor people. We grow up keenly aware, subconsciously or otherwise, to the things we're missing, right? And if we're marginalized, that tends to be a lot of things. We're often missing self-esteem, yes, but where does that come from? We're missing healthy, loving relationships. We're missing healthy dynamics of attraction. healthy material situations, healthy social situations. All humans seek and cultivate relationships to meet their needs. Parasocial relationships are valid forms of relationships through which people can meet these needs. The social aspect of being part of a fandom, making friends, going out to get coffee, learning about other people's upbringings and ideas and cultures are things that marginalized people are robbed of because we grow up in situations where we're ostracized and isolated. As humans, marginalized or not, we all move to parasocial relationships instinctively, the same way we move to any relationships, because parasocial relationships are a type of relationship. We don't do this because we're so damaged and desperate for repair, necessarily. Some of us might. We don't do this because we're so naive as to think we know people just because we watch their TV shows, or so naive not to realize that people might have ulterior motives for making media. We do this out of instinct. We do this out of necessity. There's a line in Repeat Stuff toward the end where Bo describes the psychology of the parents bringing their girl to see these pop stars because their little girl is in love, and how can love be wrong? Parasocial love is complicated and certainly can be abusive or creepy. But all forms of love are complicated, and they all can be abusive or creepy. Especially for marginalized people, we grow up often being deceived and hurt by the people closest to us. We know what it feels like to hear racist abuse from our own aunts and uncles, to receive homophobia by the people we call our friends. When you deal with that experience, it opens your eyes to the fact that no relationship is sacred. And personal relationships are not godly. They're not perfect. They can, in fact, be extremely toxic, not worth keeping, and a lot less beneficial than parasocial relationships. In response to these personal relationships, which we have our insight on because of how we've struggled with them, whether we're marginalized or not, we use parasocial relationships to help us build ourselves up from a point of being disadvantaged. And there are unique benefits to the parasocial that we can't get from the personal. If I stan Liam Payne, and I don't, but if I did, and he turned out to be a bad guy, I can cut that relationship off and remain safe, and still even enjoy the moments and records and friendships I built through that parasocial relationship. If I fall in love with a girl, and that girl turns out to be abusive, I may have to deal with that for the rest of my life. And for someone to speak to you as a stan and tell you, don't do that, you're being exploited, go make real friends. Wow, thanks. That person is clearly privileged as hell. Because for one, you already know that people will exploit you. You know what it feels like. And it's not just the people that you don't know. It's the people you do know. You know what it feels like to be exploited by your real friends. It's like telling me to not go eat fast food because it's not healthy, and saying you need to eat real food like frozen pizza. Moreover, the idea that some cishet white guy has to wake me up from my reality is hilarious. Rather than do all that and then do all this work to deny your own parasocial relationships, whether they be with Elon Musk or Dream or Vladimir Lenin or Blackpink or fucking Zorro from One Piece. He's not a person. How about we all accept that these parasocial relationships are a part of our lives? How about we stop pretending to hate parasocial relationships and start seeking ways to make them healthier for both the media figure and for ourselves? Thanks for watching. I'm Elliot. This one took a while, so it's coming out a little bit late. If you're a fan of this and you want to support me in some way, you can donate to my Ko-Fi, which is in the description. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to this channel, hit the like button. You can also leave a comment in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Yeah. I love you.